Yeah, I'm
Start
Jo.
out by telling
Okay.
a little bit about yourself. Are you ready?
Yeah,
And
I'm
I'd say-
Joanne Mann.
Okay, I say we're ready now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Joanne Mann, and I'm a native Milwaukeean.
Oh, you were born here.
I was born at Columbia Hospital in 1920. And I lived here all my life except for the time I spent at college and in the Army.
And Mann was your original name?
No,
What was your original
my
name?
name was Goldberger.
And how did it come to be changed?
Married?
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So when I married John,
Okay.
right.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your family.
I have a very close family. John and I had twins, and who have been just tremendous, and a son who was also quite a guy, who was born on their 4th birthday. So we only have one birthday in our family, 22nd of October.
I see.
Yeah. I guess my life was pretty usual, except that my second life was mostly with the Girl Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a long, wonderful time with them, and I'm still semi-active. But I started out when I was 10 years old, and I never dropped out. Had my girls in my troop, and our troop went all the way through high school, and I worked principally in the camping area for quite some time. Became chairman of the camp committee, which put me on the local board, and I served there for 6 years, and then went on to the national board, where I served for 3 terms, or 9 years. And during that time, I also worked with the International Girl Scouts. I was on the committee for the Cabana, which is in Cuernavaca, Mexico. So it's been, I was a national trainer for the Girl Scouts, and it's just been my second life.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
You've called it your second life. Tell me about your first life.
Well, my first life was lots of fun. I was always an athlete. I had a wonderful time with it in high school. I went to Whitefish Bay High School. I think ours was the first class at Whitefish Bay that started in the high school. It was so new that prior to then, they were Richard School or even in Shorewood for a while. From there, I went to the University of Wisconsin, where I majored in physical education.
What was your sport?
My favorite sport is field hockey,
Oh.
but I like any kind of sport, and never played tennis or golf. I mean, those were things I was going to do in my next life, and I never gotten around to it. Had a wonderful time in college. One of the projects I had, which was fun, I was president of the Women's Athletic Association, and as part of that, we took a group, but we always had a fundraising affair, which was on campus, which was made up of all sorts of groups that wanted to do something on the stage. I mean, be it singing, a skit, or something else. And so we took that group down to Camp Grant. This was early in '41. And these, were all the young sailors who were getting ready to, and I know would be going into the real battle. So there were a lot of little things that we did during that time, but college was a great experience. My first 2 years I spent at Chadbourne Hall, and then moved to Elizabeth Waters, which had just been built. And I was one of the people who took people through Liz Waters just to see it while it was being built. And the only way you could find your way around was that all the halls were papered in different paper, and you knew which hall you were in and what floor you were on, only if you memorized the paper, because it was, if you've been there, it's built on a hill, and it's a very peculiar situation to find yourself in when there are no numbers on the rooms. And I just had a real good time at college.
Is that where you met your husband?
I met my husband many years before. Our folks were friends, and you never look at people who are real close by. I mean, we did lots of things, and in high school, John looked pretty good. It's a wild story that I can tell you. I don't know if you want to hear it or not. But I always said, when our folks were playing bridge and mahjong with 4 other couples whom they were always close to, Mother and Dad took me to somebody else's house while they were playing. And I cried and cried and cried and cried. And in those days, they'd pull out a dresser drawer, empty it, you put your baby in the dresser drawer, and that was the bassinet. Yeah, you probably remember that. Yeah. Well, I cried so much, and John was sound asleep. He was a little 4-year-old. So they stuck me in bed with him, and I had to marry him to make me an honest woman. So we've been friends for many, many years. And through him, I met a very interesting part of his family, which has been a part of my life ever since. His great-grandfather was Baruch Schlesinger Wheel, and he came over to this country from Alsace-Lorraine to buy horses for the French army. And he was out in the Cedar Lake area, liked it so well that he took the money, the horse thief, and he took the money and bought property instead. And we are on that property now with a summer home. And Slinger used to be Schlesingerville, which was named after him. And after or during the war, it sounded much too German. So they took 11 letters out of Schlesinger, and it became Slinger. And that whole history of the family out there, the property there are summer places on, there's a big family property there, 3 homes with different parts of the family. And they settled there. The first home was built there in 1848. And that home burned down, and then there were a couple others that were built, and the one that we're in now was built in 1898, yeah. The other homes, one of them had to be torn down, couldn't be saved, and so they built a new one, and there's a 3rd home. So when we're out there, we have this wonderful extended family. And last time I counted, there were 57 beds among all the houses out there, and then the overflow had to go to the motels. But it's a wonderful place for kids and dogs and people, and we've enjoyed that over many, many years.
You spent most of the summer there?
Yeah, yeah. And Oh, it's just a big part of our life and a big part of the community, and people are active around there. We have a bunch of sailors in our family, and there's a yacht club that is not a yacht club, but it's for sailors, and it's great. And 4 members of our family, including my son, who was of age, have been Commodore of the Yacht Club, which started way back when. So it's a wonderful family that I was so happy to be a part of, and John was so much a part of that family, of course.
When did you and John get married?
We got married during the war in 1943. We were home on leave. We were talking. John was drafted before December 7th, and he was going to be in in the Army for a year, and then we were going to get married. Well, that didn't work out. So in 43, we were both home on leave.
You were home on leave, so you had been in the service.
Oh, yeah. And both our brothers were close by. They were both in service, but they were close by. So there was enough family there so that we were married at my home in September of 43.
Talk a little bit about being in the service. What made you decide to go in?
Well, I graduated from college in 42. And I had a job teaching in the elementary schools in Whitefish Bay. And then, when December 7th came along, it changed a lot of things. And well, there were, the waves were just being organized, and they were being organized at the University of Wisconsin. And they were there recruiting. And they needed physical education people. So I just sort of got interested in it. But finally I had a sort of a general acceptance into the waves. But I had to have a physical exam and so forth. During that time, I was a counselor in a camp up in northern Wisconsin. So I went into the Marshfield Clinic and had an exam and so forth. Passed that. Went down to Chicago for the final exam. And they found I didn't have enough opposing teeth, which was great fun to talk about, because my front teeth had been knocked out with a baseball bat, and I had a couple other. So that was it. So I taught for the semester, and then I thought, I'm going to try to get into the Army, because they might not need so many teeth. So I did, and I enlisted, and went into service. And I was sent to Fort Des Moines for basic training, and from basic training I went into OCS and graduated as the equivalent of second lieutenant, which it wasn't called that with the WACs, because I went in when it was WAAC, and it was very, very kind of separate in their nomenclature and so forth. And then when we became WAC, then we were really part of the Army Air Corps at that point. And so I had my OCS training at Fort Des Moines, and then I went to Westover Field.
Where was that?
in Massachusetts, and from there, well, John was then on orders to go overseas. And so when he was on orders, I thought, well, I might as well get on orders too. And we had talked about it, and if he was going, I was going to go. And as things worked out, I was all set on orders to go overseas. I was staging up at Grenier Field, and all of a sudden, his orders were canceled. So I went from the United States to Casablanca and was there for 11 months. And while I was there, he was on orders to go overseas, and he arranged it so he could stop in Casablanca. There was a medical officer on the plane. He talked to me. He said, you know, my wife is in Casablanca. Is there any chance you could ground me for a couple of days? And of course, it all worked out. So he was in Casablanca for, I think, 4 days. And the Army put us up at the Anfa Hotel, which was a beautiful hotel where majors and above usually stayed. Neither of us were a major at that point, you know, but the commanding general was wonderful and said stay there, and so we just had a wonderful time. One of the funniest things that happened while we were there was there was the Army had taken over the hotel, and this is where the Casablanca conference was held, you know, between Roosevelt and Churchill, et cetera. And so the two of us were on our way up to our room, and the little guy at the desk told us the next morning, he said, all these men were coming over here and saying, is there something for us here too? And he said he really had a hard time convincing them that we were married. But there are all sorts of things like that that always happen, you know. You got involved.
What was it like being in service and being Jewish and being in the service? Did it make a difference?
I never had any problems at all. In fact, in all my life, I never, ever had a problem being Jewish. And I always said I was, and so forth. One of the most memorable times I can remember, though, was while we were there, the women or families that had left Europe and gone to Casablanca as a refuge had a Seder at which they invited all the Jewish people in uniform to come as a thank you for their liberation. You know, and it was a Seder to be remembered, as you can well imagine. Yeah, and I had a couple of, you know, interesting times because I was Jewish, probably. There was a crash outside of Casablanca, and there were 3 chaplains on the plane, a Catholic, a Protestant, and a rabbi. Excuse me. One of them was killed. One of them was badly injured, so that he had to go back to the States. And the third had a broken arm and a broken leg, and that was the rabbi. And he was assigned to the library doing sort of Red Cross work. And, of course, we became friends. And, excuse me, and he became a very important rabbi. He was the placement rabbi for Hebrew Union. And his name was Malcolm Stern, and we called him Mac. Now, you call a rabbi Mac, it's sort of interesting. Yeah. But there were all sorts of little interesting things like that that happened while we were there.
When you left the Army, what did you do?
When I left the Army, I can't remember what I did right away, except get caught up. We had made up our minds that John was going to go back to school. He hadn't finished in engineering. And so I went up to Madison, got a job as a teaching assistant. And he had gone to Marquette, and they had some crazy rule about what you had to have had in order to transfer. So I went to the authorities, and I said, my husband is coming back, and I want him to be on campus, and so forth. And a few tears, not really. So he had a very poor record of his final year with the war, and that was one of the troubles they were having in trying to get him into Madison. So they put him on final probation, and they let him go, and we lived in the trailer camp out at Camp Randall, had a great time. And he finished with straight A's, so they didn't have to worry about him. And then we went back to Milwaukee, and I don't remember what we did except trying to get settled, and I was involved with Girl Scouts and so forth. And then I got a call from one of the professors in Madison, and she said, I just looked at your record, and your youngest is in is in kindergarten. So I think maybe you would be interested in going back into teaching part-time. And I said, jeepers, I don't know. So she said, please go in and just talk to Sister Mary Ann. This was at St. John Cathedral High School. And I was so taken with the nuns there. And so I taught part-time there for 15 years until it closed. And during that time, I did a little comparative religion because they wanted to know about the holidays, and I talked to some of the classes and so forth, so made a little use of it. And at that point, I had wished that I had had a better Jewish background, because even though I was confirmed, we didn't have a real Jewish family. My grandmother, who lived with us, never sewed on Shabbat. We lit candles quite often, but that was about it. And John's family was about the same. And then all of a sudden, I don't know where it came from, but then it's Jane, Judy, and Chip, who were all very involved with the Jewish community. And so you never know where it comes from.
You mentioned your grandparents. Where were they originally from?
3 of my grandparents were born in the United States, and the 4th in Budapest. And I had a great-great-grandmother born in the United States. And Mother's family came into the United States through Savannah, we think, or New Orleans. But they were Southerners, and they were plantationers. And they lived in Louisiana. My mother was raised on a cotton plantation. And she met my dad in New Orleans during World War I when she was going to school to learn to be a telegrapher. And my dad was stationed down there. And so I have a lot of Jewish family down there. But when they're a long way away, you don't really get to know them. But a few I've really kept up with, especially one who is a Benedictine monk up at Collegeville. And when he celebrated his Golden Jubilee, we were all invited, so I went up and had a room in the rectory. And some of my Catholic friends always kid me and saying, we've never had a room in the rectory, you know. So he's always been a very interesting guy because he, of course, was a convert. And so that part of the family, I wish I knew a little better. We went down south when I was little, and I can remember some of the things, but Mother was a true Southerner when she came up here. My dad was born in Chicago, and his father was quite a guy. He was a lithographer for the American Banknote Company, and he made all the plates for world money because the American Banknote Company was one of the few in the world that could produce paper bills. You know, I mean, paper money. It's not paper, you know. And they lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. And he was a labor leader down out there. But he was the one who developed safety paper, you know, for a check when you can't erase it, comes out. And he always thought the American Banknote Company should reimburse him somehow or another for his great invention, and they didn't. So, I mean, it's part of work, you know. So he had a couple of real big secrets that he died with, and he never would tell anybody about it. So, you know, it was kind of an interesting part of history. Yeah.
You mentioned that John graduated with straight A's.
Yeah.
And that you were a teacher. What did John do after he graduated?
He was an engineer, and he got a job, a nice one, and he retired as an engineer from the lattice company, and he was just enjoying retirement, healthy as he could be, stung by a bee, and he was gone in 10 minutes. Because he had a real anaphylactic reaction. And I was out of town. I was out at the World Conference of Girl Scouts and Girl Guides. So it was a real shocker. Jane was right there, and Jane, you know, was an expert in CPR and so forth, but the doctor said the only thing that could have saved him was adrenaline directly to the heart. And some doctors don't even know how to do that. But he had never known, you know, he had been stung before, and always had kind of a bump, but this was a real shocker, as you can well imagine, 20 years ago. Just enjoying his retirement and so forth. So that's about my life.
What are you doing now?
Now I just moved to Laurel Oaks. I sold my house that we had lived in for 52 years. I was pregnant with Chip when we moved in. I'm trying to get a little bit settled. I'm enjoying it. I do a little for the Girl Scouts here and there, but I volunteer out at the Audubon Center, and I'm part of a wonderful group of retired people, and we do building and maintenance and build whatever they need out there. And the thing that I have most fun with is working with the naturalists, and they come up with an idea of something they'd like to use as a teaching skill, and then the two of us get together and I build it, and sometimes it's usable and sometimes it isn't, but it's fun to pick these men's minds and see what they're really thinking about.
And you do the actual building.
Yeah. I've enjoyed woodworking. And one of the reasons that I didn't give up my house sooner, I mean, what was I doing with a 4-bedroom house, was because I had my shop in the basement. And if I couldn't sleep, I could go down there and build or whatever. And as you said, we met building the sukkah at the day school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, built the sukkah at Sinai. A few sukkahs around, yeah. But I love working with my hands. And now my son has moved, and he has a wonderful basement. All my tools are going to go into his basement, and so I'll have some fun.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about? You've had such an interesting life.
I was just thinking about the Jewish influences in my life, and they're always there. And I'm so delighted with my kids who have carried on and have a real interest. When people ask me a question, a lot of times I'll say, wait till I talk to my kids and I'll give you an answer, because I don't feel I'm as learned as they all are, and they're so involved, and they're just great, and I've been a wonderful family, and I've had a wonderful life. I think my folks did something that not too many people did. At one time, both my grandmothers and one grandfather were living with us. And of course, we learned a lot from them. And I was in college most of that time, and my little brother was still at home. He became a doctor with 4 kids and grandchildren, and I think to myself, I'm 11 years older than he is. I used to diaper him, But Judaism has been a big part of my life, even though not demonstratively. And we were charter members of Sinai. When John and I came back after the war, our experience in going to smaller congregations wherever we were was such that we wanted to join a small congregation, and so we were charter members of Sinai and have been very, very happy. And I still feel close to Emmanuel because I had a lot of good years there in Sunday school. And one of the things I remember at Emmanuel, which is so peculiar, but they used to have a Seder in the basement, for all the families and so forth. And my mother at one time was president of the sisterhood and the council because somebody had died who was supposed to become the next one or the other, you know. So Mother was very, very active. And so they were setting up Seder, and I didn't have school. So Mother said, you can come down and help us set it up. And Mr. Isserman, who was the sexton of the temple and quite some guy, saw me moving a couple chairs and said, you can't do it. We're not insured for children, you know. So Rabbi Barron took me home for lunch. And it was funny because we had baked beans. And I remember saying something about, isn't there pork in baked beans? And he said, oh, these are vegetarian. But it was wonderful. I mean, he felt so sorry for me because here I was working so hard, and Mr. Isserman said, you can't. Yeah. But, you know, you think of funny little things like that that have happened along the way.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story with us.